There is something rather strange about an argument. It can begin with almost nothing. A comment, a disagreement, a different opinion, sometimes even a look. And suddenly, something in us is changing. We begin explaining, defending, correcting, proving. And somewhere along the way, the conversation stops being about whatever it was originally about. It becomes about me. Am I being understood? Am I being respected? Do they think I'm wrong? Do they think I'm foolish? Why can't they see what I can see? And perhaps most importantly, how do I make them understand? We've all been there. I certainly have. And what's interesting is that sometimes, even while the argument is happening, a small part of us knows exactly what's going on. We know we're no longer listening. We're waiting for the other person to stop talking so that we can continue explaining why we're right. This is where relationships become such an interesting place to explore everything we've been talking about, because it's relatively easy to feel peaceful when nobody is challenging us. It's relatively easy to feel present when we're walking alone, watching the ocean or sitting quietly in a garden. But put another human being in front of us, particularly somebody we love, and things become rather more interesting, because other people don't always behave the way we'd like them to. They misunderstand us. They disagree with us. They disappoint us. Sometimes they criticize us. Sometimes they're right. And that can be particularly annoying. But why does disagreement sometimes feel so uncomfortable? Why can another person's opinion produce such a powerful reaction inside of us? Perhaps because they're not simply challenging an idea. At least, that's not how it always feels. It can feel as though they're challenging me. And once that happens, the mind does what it does. It gathers evidence. It remembers previous disagreements. It predicts where the conversation is going. It prepares the next response. And gradually, the person standing in front of us becomes less and less visible, because we're no longer really meeting them. We're meeting our interpretation of them. Think about the last time you had a genuine disagreement with somebody you love. Perhaps you remember what they said. Perhaps you remember what you said. But there's a more interesting question. Were you actually listening? Not listening so that you could answer, not listening so that you could identify the weakness in their argument, not listening while quietly preparing your defense. Simply listening. That's surprisingly difficult, because to really listen, something has to become quiet. Not thought. Thought can still be there, and not intelligence. We still need that. But perhaps for a moment, the need to continually protect and reinforce me has to soften. And then something rather remarkable becomes possible. The other person appears, not as an opponent, not as somebody who needs to agree with us, not as somebody whose job is to confirm our understanding of the world, but simply as another human being having an experience. And this doesn't mean they are right. That's important. Being present doesn't mean becoming passive. It doesn't mean agreeing with everybody. It doesn't mean allowing other people to treat us badly. And it certainly doesn't mean abandoning our own judgment. You can disagree. You can say no. You can establish a boundary. You can walk away. And sometimes you absolutely should. But perhaps all of those things can happen without requiring the other person to become wrong so that I can remain right. There is a difference. And I think we can feel that difference. Think about what happens when somebody genuinely listens to you. You know it almost immediately. They're not waiting to speak. They're not trying to fix you. They're not quietly constructing their response. They're simply there. And something in us relaxes. We feel seen. Perhaps that's because for those few minutes, there is less me standing between two people. And this gives us another way of thinking about selflessness. We explored the word in the last series, not simply as generosity, not simply as putting somebody else first, but as less continual organization of experience around ourselves. And perhaps nowhere is that more visible than in a relationship. Because when there is slightly less me, I don't need you to agree with me quite so much. I don't need you to behave exactly as I expected. I don't need every expression on your face to mean something about me. And perhaps most importantly, I can begin to hear what you're actually saying rather than what my mind tells me you're saying. That doesn't make relationships perfect. Far from it. People will still irritate us. We will still misunderstand each other. We will still say stupid things. We'll still become defensive. We'll still have arguments. We're human. But perhaps the argument doesn't need to become another place where the self has to survive. Maybe I can be wrong. Maybe you can be wrong. Maybe neither of us completely understands what is happening. And perhaps we can remain there for a moment without rushing to close that uncertainty. There is something else that happens when the need to be right begins to soften. Curiosity returns. Instead of, how do I make you understand me, something else becomes possible. What am I not seeing? What is this like for you? Why does this matter to you? What happened inside of you when I said what I said? These are very different questions because they're not trying to win. They're trying to see. And perhaps that is what relational presence actually looks like. Not becoming endlessly patient, not becoming endlessly agreeable, not never getting angry, but being able, even occasionally, to meet another person without everything they say having to pass through me first. And maybe that's one of the quietest forms of freedom there is, to stand opposite another human being, someone you love, someone you disagree with, perhaps even someone who has hurt you, and for a moment not need them to confirm who you are. Because when that need softens, something else becomes possible. You can actually meet them. And perhaps relationships change, not when two people finally learn how to agree, but when neither person needs quite so much to be right.